Today, Democrats stand nearly united behind a strategy for success. A strategy for success that includes a deadline needed to force the Iraqis to stand up for Iraq. A lot has changed in the last 9 months, but I'm more convinced than ever that a combination of serious, sustained diplomacy, real diplomacy, leveraged by a one-year deadline for the redeployment of U.S. troops, is the best way to achieve our goal of stability in Iraq and security in the region. I listened to administration spokespeople in the last few days as they go on television blasting the Democrat proposal. And it's interesting how they continue their habit of just setting up a straw man, putting something out there that has nothing to do with the reality of the program, and then knock it down. They're fond of saying, oh my gosh, a precipitous withdrawal from Iraq would be just terrible for our interests in the region. Well, let's make it clear, Mr. President. A one-year date from now, with discretion to the President to leave troops there to finish the training, with discretion to the President to leave troops there to chase al-Qaeda, with discretion to the President to leave troops there to protect American facilities and forces, with the ability to have an over-the-horizon presence, a one-year deadline from today, which would be 6 years into this war, is not a precipitous withdrawal of any kind whatsoever. In fact, there are people in the country who may think that's not even enough. The fact is that this administration wants to sow fear in Americans. And so they choose to debate something that is not the proposal of those of us who have put this proposal forward. What we propose to do is change the strategy of our mission so that we can achieve success. What we've seen is that this open-endedness, you just kind of say, oh, we need to do this and we need to do that and we want the Iraqis to stand up and we want the police to do better, and by gosh, Prime Minister Maliki said he's going to deliver. None of it delivers anything. And the Iraqi politicians know that as long as there is no deadline, they can take as long as they want to work out whatever power struggles and differences they have. So they're using the presence of American forces as cover for their own goals, for their own desires. And until we in the United States say to them, hey folks, get serious. Our young people are prepared, obviously, because we've been doing it for 5 years, to put their lives on the line in order to help you have democracy, but you've got to grab that democracy. You've got to make decisions. You've got to begin to go in and police your neighborhoods. And the only way you're going to change that is by being responsible and demanding something. It provides the President the discretion to be able to complete the training. What else, after 6 years, would we want to be in Iraq for besides finishing the training and standing up the Iraqi forces and chasing al-Qaeda and fighting the legitimate war on terror? Mr. President, this one-year deadline is sound policy. It is based on the Iraq Study Group's goal of redeploying U.S. combat forces from Iraq by the first quarter of 2008. It's consistent with the time frame for transferring control to the Iraqis that was set forth by General Casey and the schedule agreed upon by the Iraqi government itself. Even the President has said under his new strategy, responsibility for security would be transferred to Iraqis before the end of this year. If the President is telling us that responsibility forces, but bring the bulk of our combat forces home so they indeed will be standing up for their own security. The President has said it. The Iraqi Study Group has said it. The generals have said it. Now it's time for the United States Senate to put it on record as part of our effort to support this objective. Mr. President, it is long since time for the Iraqis to assume responsibility for their country. We need this deadline to leverage the Iraqis into making the hard compromises that are necessary. And I might add, no young soldier from the United States or Great Britain ought to be dying so that Iraqi politicians can get more time to squabble, more time to try to strike a better deal for themselves. We ought to be working overtime in order to bring about a compromise that is ultimately the only solution to what is happening in Iraq today. Mr. President, Even now, we keep hearing that the Iraqis are close to a deal on sharing oil revenues, but we still haven't seen the final agreement ratified. Without a real deadline to force a deal, there is no telling how long it will take. But we do know that as long as there is no deadline, the Iraqis will believe they can take as long as they want. We also know that American soldiers and Iraqi civilians will continue to die and be maimed while those politicians continue to use the presence of American forces as a cover for their other objectives. We saw that again last weekend when Iraqi's neighbors and key players from the international community finally got together at a conference in Baghdad. The conference was a welcome development. We've been calling for it for several years. It was long overdue. But, Mr. President, nothing tangible came out of it because, of course, no preparations and no diplomacy had been carried out leading up to it in order to get something substantive to come out of it. That is precisely why a deadline is so critical and essential, to force everyone to focus on the urgent need to reach a political solution. The debate, this debate, a debate that the Senate needs to have, offers a very clear choice. A choice between a new way forward and the old way that's taken us backwards. I might add, yesterday we saw a little more of that old way as the rhetoric escalated. The Vice President said yesterday, when members speak not of victory but of time limits, deadlines, and other arbitrary measures, they're telling the enemy simply to watch the clock and wait us out. Well, Mr. President, first of all, there's nothing arbitrary about a date for next year. The Iraq Study Group put it forward. The President has said security can be transferred by the end of this year, and the generals put that date forward. But more importantly, the Vice President of the United States must be the last person in America who believes that the enemy is waiting or watching the clock. It's Iraqi politicians who are watching the clock. They're the ones who are delaying and squabbling. The enemy is busy doing what the enemy has been doing. Moreover, the Vice President lumps the word enemy in here in a very strange way. Yes, the enemy is Al-Qaeda, and we are focused on Al-Qaeda. But the fact is that this war in Iraq is fundamentally a civil war now. It is a struggle between Sunni and Shia. And the last I knew, they are Iraqis, and they are not our enemy. They are fighting amongst each other for the power and for the future of Iraq. So with each day, this administration becomes more detached from the realities. Mr. President, I just asked for an additional minute.
Without objection, ordered.
Mr. President, I believe that if you look at the figures, this surge is not basically temporary. We see that there are some 48,000 additional troops total, the estimate about $5.6 billion. We also see that most people understand that when the President talks about undermining the troops and dealing with support for the troops, there isn't one of us here who isn't outraged by what has happened to the troops with respect to the lack of adequate armor, the lack of adequate Humvees, the lack of adequate support, numbers of personnel and planning, and most importantly, the treatment of those soldiers when they've come home. A VA budget that is inadequate, a disability system that is dysfunctional, and obviously the treatment that we saw recently at Walter Reed. So the Vice President needs to focus on how you really support the troops, and the way you really support the troops is to get the policy in Iraq right. We have a policy for success. They've had a 5-year policy for failure that has made Iran stronger, North Korea stronger, Hamas stronger, Hezbollah stronger, weakened our relations in the region, and has certainly not served the interests of our national security. Mr. President, we can do better, and this resolution that we have submitted is a way to do better. I yield the floor. Mr. President.